We mentioned in the last recording a little bit about the kavanot of Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven and how they could think that they could ask Moshe Rabbeinu to stay on the east side of the Jordan and not actually enter into the land of Israel, the land promised to Avram Avinu. Like, what were they thinking? And we brought down Rav Yitzchak Isaac Sher's approach that they viewed everything that Hashem gave them as a gift from God, and they just realized that if God is giving them all this stuff, it must be that God has a different plan for them. And he goes and explains their idea. In Rav Nebenzahl, he says something a little bit different. He brings down Rav Dessler, who actually brings down a midrash that says that Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, they were worried about gezel. They were worried about stealing. They realized if they have so much cattle, if they have so much miknei rav, their cattle has to eat something. And where are they going to graze? Where are they going to find food? So they said, Chas v'shalom, we're going to enter into the land of Israel, and they're going to steal from other people. And they said, just like their great-great-grandfather Reuven was so careful with the dudaim not to steal flowers and only give his mother flowers from the ownerless flowers, so too they're so careful, and they want to be as honest as possible in business, that they're willing not to enter the land of Israel. We're going to stay on the east side of the Jordan just so we can, to do things Hashem Shamayim and be honest, be good business people, and that's what they were thinking. Now, says Rav Nebenzahl, ultimately we have a midrash that tells us that when the different tribes were sent out into exile, so the midrash says that Bnei Gad, Bnei Reuven, they were the first to go into exile, and they actually went into exile 8 years earlier than everybody else, and it was kind of like, you didn't want to enter the land of Israel, so therefore you're going to leave earlier. So, it was a little bit sounds like, there was a mistake in what they did. So what did they do wrong? And what was wrong in their thinking? We just said it's Hashem Shamayim. They don't want to steal. They want to be honest in business. So Rav Nebenzahl brings down a famous midrash that a lot of people quote in this week's parasha. It says, if you look at the actual language, when Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven came to Moshe, they said, Moshe, we want to stay on this side of the Jordan. So they said as follows to him. They said, Moshe, Gidrot tzon nivneh lebikneinu po ve'arim letapenu. Can we please build pens for our cattle over here, and let's build cities for our children? And when Moshe responds to them, he responds to them in the opposite. He says, B'nu lachem arim letapechem v'gidrot letzon ha'achem. He says, build cities for your children over here, and build pens for your cattle. So when they asked Moshe Rabbeinu, they said, can we have a place for our cattle and then a place for our children? And Moshe responds, build a place for your children and then build the pens for your cattle. And the Midrash says they got the Ikar and Tafel mixed up. They got up what's most important and what's secondary flipped. What's most important? Your children. What's secondary important? Your business. So it's true, they're super L'Shem Shamayim in business. And I know for a lot of us, making a parnasah, supporting ourselves, supporting our families, it's very stressful. And we think about our jobs all day long. So in their heads, they're like, okay, we need a place for our jobs, we need a place for our cattle, and then we got to build a place for our children. And Moshe says, no, you got it wrong. You got to first build a place for your children, get those school going, get that chinuch going, you got to focus on your families, and then a place for your businesses. And they learn their lesson, because when they respond to Moshe Rabbeinu, they respond later on. When they respond to him, they say, let's build a place for our children, and let's build a place for our cattle, and they get the order correct. So they got the Ikar and Tafel, they fixed their mistake, and Moshe, in the leader that he was, the Moshe Rabbeinu that he was able to educate them and say, no, you got to do it right, and you can't mix up the Ikar and Tafel. Says Rav Nebenzahl, it could be though that this Ikar and Tafel was much deeper than just this one story of the children and the cattle, because he says, if you look a little bit deeper, he says, wait a second, they want to stay on the eastern side of the Jordan because they want to be honest in business, because it's very important in L'Shem Shamayim to be honest business people. But do you know what's the land of Israel? The land of Israel is the holy land of Israel. It's true that ultimately the east side of the Jordan will become kadosh, and it will become part of the ultimate land of Israel, and they're going to win it in the lottery and all that stuff. But even in that, in the halakha itself, the midrashim go on to tell you, and the halakha goes on to tell you, that they're not exactly the same. That the land of Israel, west of the Jordan, where we are here in Israel, is more holy than the eastern side. It's more holy in the sense that this says the midrash, the Beit HaMikdash will not be built on the eastern side, only in our part. And there's halachot about bikurim. The bikurim are only brought from the parts of Israel that are to the west of the Jordan. Israel proper. Eretz davar chalav udvash is western Israel, western Jordan, not eastern Jordan. So although there is some type of kedusha, it's not the full kedusha, and it's not the full promise that was given to the Jewish people. So he says, wait a second, business is very important. But what about the Beit HaMikdash? Why don't you request from Moshe Rabbeinu, let's have a part of the land of Israel where there is space for our cattle. I know it's a small land, but there are parts over here that maybe it could go. Reuven was able to figure it out. So come to the land of Israel. Or maybe we should request, let's all enter the land of Israel and let all the tribes have their cattle outside the land of Israel and have a rotation of who watches over them. But that request was missing the Ikar v'Tafel. The Ikar, the main part, is the actual land of Israel. The secondary is where you're going to have that more honest business. Maybe your business shouldn't be cattle. Maybe it should be a different business. So says Rav Neben Saldim, there might have been a problem over here, this Ikar v'Tafel, what's primary, what's secondary in their minds, even though they're L'Shem Shamayim. But even in L'Shem Shamayim, you have to judge, but what's the bigger category of L'Shem Shamayim, and how we categorize our lives. So Moshe taught them one lesson, the lesson of children versus business. But there's maybe even bigger lessons. It says Rav Neben Sal, so why does Moshe Rabbeinu give in the end? He gives in because he didn't want to fight, and he quotes the Svano to say that ultimately, when they say they're willing to fight for the Jewish people and they're going to be part of Am Yisrael, and they're not negating everything, so Moshe is willing to compromise, and says the Safano, he didn't want machloket. So ultimately Moshe Rabbeinu gives in. But in the bigger picture, the land of Israel would have been a better place to go. And there is a negative idea over there. There is a lacking in how they categorize their L'Shem Shamayim, and how you categorize what's important. It's true, they're L'Shem Shamayim business, but they're not being L'Shem Shamayim in the greater scheme of where should I live. I should live closer to Beit HaMikdash with the other 10 tribes. And there's a bigger plan, there's a bigger promise. And there was a mistake over here. And because of that mistake, ultimately they're going to be the first tribes to go out into the exile. They're going to be part of the 10 tribes that are going to be lost, and that's part of basically a punishment or it's part of Midah Keneged Midah, or however you want to learn it. But there was a mistake over here, and they should have entered the land of Israel. And Rav Nebetzal closes and says that ultimately we have to think ourselves that sometimes we fool ourselves when we want to be L'Shem Shamayim, but look, what's the bigger picture? And he gives a couple of examples. He gives an example of when Hanukkah comes along, how many people are going out of their way to buy the most expensive silver menorah so they can beautify the mitzvah, Hidur mitzvah. Let's have that ultimate mitzvah of a beautiful candle, and then they light with cheap oil or cheap wax candles. He says no, the ikar lighting of the mitzvah is in the oil to have a beautiful flame. Go out of your way and spend that big money on the big oil. Buy the silver menorah, but don't forget about the oil. That's the actual fire. That's the actual flame. We have to look at every mitzvah, see the bigger picture. He gave another example of a baby was born, and the Brit Milah was supposed to happen on a fast day. So the Abba of the baby went to the rabbi, says, Rabbi, can I postpone the Brit by 1 day so I can have a bigger, it's a fast day, nobody can eat. Can I postpone it by 1 day so we can have a big seudah with all of our family and do a big seudah mitzvah, thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with a big seudah? And the rabbi said, no, what are you talking about? This seudah is supposed to glorify the mitzvah of Brit Milah, and Brit Milah is supposed to be on the 8th day. That's the Ikar mitzvah. You're messing up Ikar and Tafel. You're messing up primary and secondary. So B'ezrat Hashem, we should learn from here that to look at bigger picture sometimes, and we should pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, learn a little bit more Torah, get a little bit more advice so we can try to categorize those ideas in our life of how to categorize what is primary, what is secondary, because we see in Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven that we can even be L'Shem Shamayim, but sometimes we miss the bigger picture going along over there. Shabbat Shalom.